Thank you for joining us for today's presentation hosted by the United States Environmental Protection Agency to facilitate understanding of the 2013 Vessel General Permits Environmentally Acceptable Lubricants Requirements. The agenda for today's webinar includes a brief presentation followed by a question and answer session. We have muted all your lines except for the presenters' lines to cut down on background noise. If you have any questions during the webinar, we encourage you to type and submit questions using the GoToWebinar program. You can do this by using the GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You may need to expand your control panel by clicking the orange arrow button. You will then see a bold heading titled Questions. If you click the plus sign to expand the questions area, a text box will appear for typing and submitting questions to EPA staff. EPA, in conjunction with our presenters, will respond to questions at the end of the presentation. We may not be able to get to all the questions, but we will attempt to provide as much information as possible. We will also be recording this presentation and emailing it to all our participants after this presentation. One final announcement. At the end of the webinar, a short survey will appear on your screen requesting your feedback on the presentation. Your input is greatly appreciated. And with that, I will turn things over to Ryan Albert and Kate Kelly of EPA's Office of Wastewater Management to begin the presentation.
Great, thank you. My name is Ryan Albert. I will be doing a very brief introduction of the speakers today in addition to moderating some of the questions that our guests choose to ask today. First of all, thank you very much for our speakers who are joining us today and our panelists. We're very lucky to have a wide variety of expertise from both the private sector and a couple of my colleagues at EPA here joining us today. The way the presentation will go is the day will go is we'll run through a bit of presentations from our guest speakers, and then we'll take questions at the end, as Rachel said a moment ago. Without further ado, I'm going to run into our speakers' biographies. Peter Vickers from Vickers Oil is joining us and will be presenting first, if I recall. Peter Vickers is the fifth generation of his family to work at Vickers Oil, which he joined after graduating from Oxford University in 1982. Peter was one of the originators of Vickers Oil's project to formulate environmentally acceptable marine lubricants in 1993, and has been continuously involved with the development, testing, approvals, and commercialization over the last 21 years. Next, we'll be joined by Pirjetta Stüven, who's also joined by her colleague Christian Richter from SKF Blohm Voss Industries. Pirjetta will be going through the actual presentation. She's employed as the area sales manager for the Simplex shaft components and Turbolo oily water separators. She's responsible for new building projects and conversions, especially in the German market, France, and Spain. She's been working in the maritime industry since 2006 and joined SKF Blohm Voss 1 year ago. Christian will answer questions toward the end of the presentation for SKF Blohm Voss. He's employed as the area sales manager for Simplex shaft components and Turbolo oily separators as well. He works on new building projects and conversions focusing in the Americas. Next, we have Ben Bryant, who's from Kluber Lubrication. Ben is the marine market manager at Kluber Lubrication, responsible for business development in the marine industry. He's a graduate of the Massachusetts Maritime Academy and holds a 1,600-ton master's license. He also has a degree in marine policy and degree in business. From EPA today, we also have my colleague Catherine Kelly and our colleague Bridget Williams. Kate works with us implementing the VGP in the Water Permits Division EPA. Bridget Williams is the outreach lead for EPA's labeling program designed for the environment. She'll be speaking toward the end of the presentation and happy to answer any questions. So the final thing I want to do before letting the interesting people talk is read a quick disclaimer. Today's webinar is being sponsored by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. The speaker's thoughts are their own and do not necessarily represent the position of the EPA. In the event that any information in today's webinar conflicts with the terms spelled out in the VGP or the VGP fact sheet, those documents govern. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Kate.
Good morning, everyone. I think before we get started, we were going to do a couple of quick poll questions to get some idea of who we have on the phone. So hopefully you should be seeing those pop up on your screen in just a second. And if you can take a second and answer that, we would appreciate it. Okay, and it looks like we just closed the poll. So the first question is, where are you geographically located? It looks like the majority of us are in the United States, and we have a good contingent from Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Okay, and then we'll have one more poll question before we get started. Great, and it looks like we have about 38% are vessel owner-operators, 42% are industry suppliers or vendors. We have 8% government officials, and 11% other. Excellent, thank you. Okay, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'll go through a quick overview of today's presentation. Okay, so we just went through the introduction. Next, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the EAL requirements, followed by our first presentation from Vickers Oil. Then we'll have a presentation from Kluber Lubrication, and then finally a presentation by SKF Blohm Voss. As Ryan mentioned, we'll also have a couple of words from Bridget Williams from DFE, and then we'll go into trying to answer answering some of your questions. Okay. So first up, the EAL requirement is in section 2.2.9 of the VGP. And it says, as of December 19th of 2013, when the permit took effect, all vessels, both new builds and existing vessels covered under the VGP, must use an environmentally acceptable lubricant in all oil-to-sea interfaces unless technically infeasible. So for the purposes of the VGP, technically infeasible means that there are no EAL products approved for use in a given application that meet the manufacturer's specifications for the equipment, or that products which come pre-lubricated, such as wire ropes, have no available alternatives using an EAL, or products meeting the manufacturer's specification are not available within a port in which the vessel calls, or that the changeover of an EAL must wait until the vessel's dry dock. Really, the intent of this requirement is to reduce the environmental impact of lubricant discharges on the aquatic ecosystem by increasing the use of EALs for vessels operating within waters of the U.S. So what is an EAL? An EAL is a lubricant that is biodegradable, minimally toxic, and not bioaccumulative. And all of these are defined in Appendix A of the Vessel General Permit. There are a number of products meeting the permit's definition of an EAL, included in some voluntary labeling programs, which we've listed here. For example, Blue Angel, European Eco Label, Nordic Swan, Swedish Standard, OSPAR, and as we mentioned before, EPA is designed for the Environment Program, which we'll get to a little bit later. Products that are not included in one of these labeling programs but have been tested to demonstrate compliance with the EAL definition are also able, or you're also able to use those products, provided again that they meet the definitions that are described in the permit. Okay, next slide. So what is an oil-to-sea interface? An oil-to-sea interface includes any mechanical or other equipment on board a vessel where seals or surfaces may release quantities of oil that are subject to immersion in a body of water. In other words, it's equipment that's going to be coming in contact with water where there may be oil leaking into the water. We include a list of several onboard applications in the VGP, but there are also other applications that could apply. Generally, these are going to be things like controller pitch propellers, thrusters, paddle wheel propulsion, stern tubes, wire ropes, and mechanical equipment subject to immersion. We'll note vessel operators are not required to use an EAL and on-deck machinery so long as the equipment is not subject to immersion. In other words, it doesn't have an oil-to-sea interface. However, discharges from deck machinery are subject to other discharge requirements, such as those for deck washdown and runoff. This is a separate section of the permit under 2.2.1. Okay, and for documentation and reporting, so when you are using an EAL, it must be reported in your annual report, and documentation about the EAL must be kept as part of your record-keeping requirement. And this should
Again, intended to be pretty straightforward. When you're sending this to us in your annual report, we're looking for whether or not you're using a product from a labeling program, or if you're not using a labeled product, providing some information that the product meets the definition of an EAL. And that can come from any technical data sheet that shows it meets the definition, or an MSDS, something like that. If you're unable to use an EAL, if you've determined that its use is technically infeasible, then the use of a non-EAL must be reported on your annual report, and documentation also kept as part of your record keeping for the vessel. Again, the documentation is intended to be simple, basic, and straightforward, and should include information on why the use was determined to be technically infeasible. For example, a general statement from a steel manufacturer can be used as sufficient documentation, or information, for example, if you have to wait until your next dry dock to install the new steel. One thing to note, we are in the process of building our annual report system where you would submit this information to EPA, and that should be up in a few months. But the first annual report will be due to EPA in February of next year. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about today. I've just put this up here, and we can, as I mentioned, we're going to answer questions at the end of this presentation. But you have both Ryan and my contact information up here, as well as the general VGP inbox email address. If you have questions, feel free to email us anytime. We try and get back to those as soon as possible. So before we get into the next presentations, we're going to do one more poll. You should see that popping up soon. Asking whether or not you've installed an EAL on one of your vessels. Give you guys a moment to respond. Okay, so it looks like 23% have said yes, 21% have said no. We have a 56% have said it's not applicable. Great, thank you guys again for responding to those questions. And we're going to get started now with Peter Vickers and his presentation from Vickers Oil.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the EPA for inviting us to participate in this webinar. And come the slides. Next slide, please. I want to give a brief introduction to our company and then to consider the three main criteria which Kate's just outlined about technical infeasibility. To consider approvals from equipment makers, worldwide product availability, changeover recommendations, and then to conclude with some observations based on our experience with EALs over the last few years. Next slide, please. Vickers Oil, based in Leeds in the UK, was established 186 years ago, and we remain a privately owned, wholly independent specialist lubricant manufacturer. We've been making stern tube oils and other below-the-waterline marine lubricants for more than 120 years, and most relevantly for today, we've had EALs in use in such equipment since 1997. So we've already got 17 years' experience with marine EALs to draw on. We hold stocks, inventory of products worldwide, and are, of course, ISO accredited. Next slide, please. We have four ranges of VGP-compliant EALs, stern tube and stabilizer bearing lubricants, hydraulic fluid, greases, and gear oils, primarily for thrusters. And importantly, we've now supplied approaching 2,000 vessels which have used our products since 1997. So we do have a lot of experience, both in terms of the number of vessels and the length of time in use. Next slide, please. This shows the main areas where our EALs are being used. The VGP-mandated applications are near the top of the slide: stern tubes, controllable pitch propellers, thrusters, stabilizers, and rudders. And as we heard, the VGP also recommends the use of EALs in other applications on deck or in the hull. Next slide, please. The VGP has already generated a substantial increase in demand for EALs from customers worldwide. Since last summer, we've seen a huge number of inquiries for information, as well as a surge in orders for both new builds and dry dockings. And in general, most users are well aware of the VGP requirements and are seeking to comply with them. But there has been some confusion about the grounds for claims of technical infeasibility among both users and equipment makers. We have advised all parties not to rush into hasty decisions. It will be a gradual process to introduce these products and make sure that changeover is done properly. We've been preparing detailed recommendations for customers, considering each vessel in turn and evaluating each application separately. So I want to turn now to those grounds for technical infeasibility, looking first at equipment maker approvals. Next slide, please. First, stern tubes. Our stern tube EAL, Hydrox Bio, has been on vessels since 1997, and indeed the longest continual use on any one vessel is now more than 11 years. We regularly get inspection reports after 5 years' use on a variety of different seal types and different vessels. And you can see pictured there 3 rings from an aft seal, which were inspected recently at dry dock after 5 years running. The seals were assessed by the customer and by the fitter to be in good condition. So the products are proven in practice. Next slide, please. As I'm sure we'll hear later from Pirjetta, stern tube seal makers have conducted a great deal of research and testing to ensure that their seals are compatible with EALs and to determine the conditions under which they can accept the use of EALs for 5-year intervals. In light of their own testing, and after inspecting the actual condition of seals after several years' use, some stern tube seal makers are reducing their previous restrictions on the use of EALs. Others are introducing new elastomer seal materials with improved compatibility to EALs. So overall, for most conventional stern tube seal designs, it is now technically feasible to use EALs provided that the appropriate elastomer type as specified by the seal maker is used. And Vickers Hydrox Bio is approved by all the major stern tube seal makers. And just a caveat for this and all applications, you should always confirm the detailed approval status and the recommendations, both with the equipment manufacturer and with the EAL supplier. Next slide, please. Another major area of interest for customers has been grease. There are certain VGP applications, such as some CPP designs, some stabilizers, and in particular some rudder bearings, which are grease lubricated and where equipment maker approvals are required. Vickers BioGrease EP2 has gained such approvals, and so its use is technically feasible in those applications. In some other applications, such as re-greasing wire ropes, OEM approvals are generally not required. Next slide, please. The picture for controllable pitch propellers is a little bit more complicated, partly because the designs vary quite widely, and different designs, even from the same manufacturer, can require different types of lubricant. But some CP manufacturers have already given full approval to one or more EALs, including our EcoShore HSE. Other CPP manufacturers are still testing EALs or doing a desk evaluation. So overall, it is technically feasible to use EALs in many types of CPP, but you should always check the precise details and recommendations for each case. Next slide, please. Fin stabilizer manufacturers have been aware of customer demand for EALs for several years, and so there are some long-established reference users. As most stabilizer manufacturers have now approved one or more EALs, overall their use is technically feasible, dependent on the model design and conditional on the installation of appropriate seals. Next slide, please. However, thruster makers are generally taking a much more cautious approach. We think that's entirely right. There are very few, if any, thruster units which have yet run on EALs for 5 years. Thrusters are critical pieces of equipment, and risks should not be taken. That said, all the thruster makers have programs to evaluate and test EALs, and some have been running trials for a while. Our own product has been in multiple OEM supervised trials since 2009. But several thruster makers have issued letters stating that the use of EALs is at present technically infeasible. Next slide, please. And moving on to the second area of technical infeasibility, which is availability of product, which is an issue, of course, not just availability in the US, but worldwide. Vickers is holding increased levels of inventory at key ports globally in response to the great increase in demand. And we believe that new market entrants will, over time, further widen product availability. So lack of availability should not routinely be a reason to claim technically infeasible. Next slide, please. The third ground for technical infeasibility is about changeover requirements and the need for dry docking. Vickers, in line with belief with most equipment makers, recommends that changing over to EALs should happen in dry dock for below the waterline applications in order to ensure that you start with a clean, intact system, that EAL compatible seals are fitted, and so as to minimize the carryover of the previous lubricant. But some above-deck grease applications can be changed at sea, provided that the existing grease is compatible with the new EAL grease. Next slide, please. Based on our experience with marine EALs over the last 17 years, we believe that their successful use relies on a three-way cooperation between the equipment maker, the EAL supplier, and the customer. Each has got an individual responsibility. The equipment maker can ensure that EAL-compatible seals, paints, and other components are fitted. The EAL formulator should use its expertise to ensure that the environmental demands are balanced with the performance requirements. And the customer must maintain the EAL properly once it's in use. EALs are premium products and should be properly cared for. In particular, customers should pay attention to the instructions for use issued by the equipment maker and the EAL supplier, and should use an oil condition monitoring service that's been designed for EALs, and of course should then follow the advice given in those reports. Next slide, please. So in summary, the use of VGP-compliant EALs is now technically feasible in many applications. Marine EALs have been proven in practice. They're compatible with system components and are approved by OEMs. They're readily available worldwide, and they're making a real contribution to minimizing the environmental impact of shipping. Next slide, please. So if you'd like any further information, please see the dedicated VGP page on our website or contact us if you have any questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you, Peter, very much. Next up, we're going to have Ben Bryant from Kluber Lubrication.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this presentation, and thank you for to the EPA for putting this presentation on. Kluber Lubrication has developed a portfolio of VGP-compliant EALs to meet the needs of the maritime industry. And in this presentation, I'll quickly discuss our products, and then I'll speak to the current status of the VGP implementation as viewed from a supplier. But first, I'd like to just cover a few facts about Kluber Lubrication to introduce you to the company. Next slide. Kluber is a German company that was founded in 1929 and started to focus on specialty lubricants in the 50s. We established our first subsidiary outside of Germany in 1958, and in the U.S. market, we've had a large presence since 1983. We really focus on R&D as a key driver of our business. So we have 2 R&D centers now, one in Munich, which has an extensive test bay for sophisticated testing of lubricants, and we've just created a second R&D center here in the U.S. Where we will focus mostly on EAL greases to meet the needs of the VGP. We currently have production centers in 14 countries and sales and distribution offices in 1 country. Right now, we service over 25 defined market segments with 3,000 different products. The marine industry is one of our market segments. Next slide. So 2 of the components of our strategy are, again, research and development and a direct sales force. So of our worldwide employees, at almost 2,000 employees, 8% of the workforce is working in R&D, and about 50% of the workforce is working directly with the customers to solve their issues. Next slide, please. And so for EALs, what is the Kluber offering on EALs? And it essentially follows the same strategy that we've done with all the other industries. We work closely with manufacturers of the equipment to design specialty lubricants that meet or exceed the manufacturer's specification. And the purpose of that is to maximize the investment that the ship owner has made in their equipment. We've also, since the release of the vessel general permit and the requirement for OEM approvals, we've been working very closely with the OEMs on having approvals for our products. Thirdly, we do believe that the Eco-Label or EPA design or one of the other certification programs provide a third-party classification system that assures the customer that our products are VG compliant. So all of our oils and hydraulic oils are certified by the EU Eco-Label, and our grease that I'll talk about is under review by the Design for the Environment. We do have global availability through our direct sales force and or Kluber distributors. And finally, our value offering includes our engineering support from our direct sales force. Next slide, please. And so the current Kluber portfolio for EAL products includes stern tube oils, thruster gear oils, hydraulic fluids, and a new product that we've just released focused on wire rope and open gears. In describing each of these products, we use the highest quality ingredients to get the best performance out of the lubricant. So our stern tube oil and thruster gear oils use high quality ester oils as the base oil, which are highly resistant to hydrolysis and other issues that would degrade the oil. Our gear oil is formulated to protect gears against pitting and wear. And then our hydraulic fluids would pass all of the standard hydraulic fluid tests, and they have very good low temperature capabilities. All three of those product lines are approved or are certified by the EU Eco-Label. The wire rope and open gear grease that we've just launched is focused to provide the is a product that provides the customer with an excellent wire rope product that has excellent adhesion and corrosion protection. And then on open gears, such as jack-up legs, would have great anti-wear properties. But as mentioned, we do have additional EAL products in development following our strategy of looking at specific applications on the vessel and then developing a grease that would maximize the length of, or maximize that product or that piece of equipment. Next slide. Thank you. So from our point of view, how is the transition to EALs going? Well, the first thing I would say is that it really is following the path that the EPA envisioned, and that it's a gradual transition. From my understanding, there was no requirement to transition over to EALs quickly. The need to transition to EALs really should follow the safety of the vessel and the OEM approvals. So customers are taking advantage of this transition period. They're looking at their dry dock schedules and they're looking at their OEM approvals to come up with a plan to transition their vessels. But the other thing that I've noticed is that they're using this time to educate themselves on the products and on the VGP requirements. When I first started talking to customers a year and a half ago or 2 years ago on this, there was very little understanding of what the VGP requirements were, and that has changed dramatically. The other thing that's changed dramatically are the people that I'm talking to. So a year and a half ago, I would have been talking to the compliance people within each of the companies, and now that has moved much more into the operations of the vessels. So we have seen a transition of knowledge to the operators and out onto the vessels. Next slide, please. And then by application, how is the transition going? Well, for the equipment that is subject to immersion, such as wire ropes or jack-up legs or maybe some back deck equipment that would be immersed in water, the transition should be taking place now. Most of those do not require OEM approvals. But there are a few applications here and there that you come across where an OEM approval might be required and or dry docking. I would say for the most part, though, that the subject to immersion part of the EAL transition is moving along fairly quickly. The stern tubes application, where there are different options available, and many OEM approvals available, are moving along based on the dry dock schedule. Customers are beginning to select which type of application they're going to apply or use to meet the VGP. So whether it's a water lubricated stern tube, an air seal system, or an EAL lubricant, they're starting to make those decisions and they're starting to implement them as they go to dry dock. The thrusters, as was previously mentioned, and the CTP units are a different story. There is a real need to test the products that are available to make sure that they meet the requirements of the thruster units. The load on thrusters is quite a bit higher than the load on a propeller shaft, and so I think there's a need to put these products into trial and determine which products will meet the long-term requirements of the thruster manufacturers. There are many OEM trials underway, and we're taking part in some of those, and we do have some initial approvals, but for the most part, customers are relying on the letters of non-feasibility in the short term. Next slide, please. And then what are the leading questions that we're being asked when we're out in the field? And I've listed these as the main topics that I cover with the customers. The first is on OEM approvals and on warranties. Particularly around seal systems, the warranties are a major question that you would want to speak to your seal manufacturer on. For the most part, I see 2.5 years, except for an air seal system, but I think that will increase with time. The inspection process is another area of question in terms of who's doing the inspecting, what's required in an inspection process, and that speaks to the memorandum of understanding between the Coast Guard and the EPA. I think some of that will work itself out fairly quickly as to what kind of questions the Coast Guard will be asking when they're on board a vessel, but the key there is to educate your crew members on how to maintain the records and on what the plan is going forward. Price and performance is always a question that's asked. There's really no one solution for all applications in the marine industry, and that is where customers need to spend the time now to determine what is the best product for their application. Availability. This is a new product launch for quite a few companies, including ours. And availability is always a problem in a new product launch. So our advice to customers is based on your shipyard schedules. Work with your suppliers and give them long-range forecasts for any shipyard transitions that you're going to do, and that should mitigate any availability issues during the shipyard period. The question around barrier fluids and barrier greases comes up quite often, particularly in regards to thrusters. The thrusters have two different seal systems, one at the propeller and one also up on the steering system at the top of the thruster. And so there are some questions by the vessel operators on what constitutes a seal system that will protect oil from entering into the ocean, and when can you continue to use mineral oil versus an EAL. I think that will be worked out over time with the EPA, but in general the EPA has said that unless you can guarantee that mineral oil won't leak through the inner seal and out into the environment, then the entire thruster system would need to be converted over to an EAL. And then the final question that we get a lot about are the EAL certifications, which again, Kluber is committed to having all of our products certified by a third-party organization. Next slide, please. And so, in summary, how should you proceed as a vessel owner? It really is all about having a transition plan by vessel. so that you know your applications, you know the OEMs for each application, and the feasibility on each of those applications. You would want to look at your dry dock schedule and schedule your transition based on the dry docks that are coming up. And you would want to ensure that your reporting and your inspection of the applications are communicated down to the vessel operators so that they can comply with the annual requirements of the BGP. Second, seek letters of infeasibility from OEMs where appropriate. Some of the OEMs have a process where going online you can enter in the information on your vessel, and there they will then be able to issue your letter of infeasibility based on that. Continue to communicate with your OEM because these approvals will come over time, and you will want to be right on top of that when the approvals are made because it will affect your plans and your dry dock schedule. And then consider participating in a trial. There may be some savings for you if you participate in a trial, and the OEMs are looking for those opportunities to conduct trials. Again, educate your vessels and crews on the plan because they're the ones who will be talking to the Coast Guard as the inspections take place, and use this time that you have to research the options that make sense for your operations and which products meet your expectations. And lastly, as you do your analysis, look to minimize the total cost of the operation over the length of the equipment lifespan. Next slide. And so thank you very much for your attention today. My contact information is listed on this last slide, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ben. Next up, we have Pirjetta Stüven from Blohm Voss.
Yes, good day, everybody. So actually, I'm holding this presentation together with my colleague Christian Richter.
Hello, also from my side.
He will answer the question afterwards. So first slide, please. So in the beginning, I'd just like to give you a short overview about our company, SKF Blohm Voss Industries. So we founded in 1877 as Blohm Voss Shipyard in Hamburg in Germany, and since last year in February, so 1 year ago, we are a member of the SKF group. As we have more than 60 years of experiences in steel solution designs, and nowadays in the management board are Mr. Martin Johansmann and Niklas Bayes. We have a turnover about 91 million euros. And here in Hamburg work 340 employees, and we have 420 worldwide. Within our service network, we count 60 sales agents and service stations worldwide, so we cover all major ports. And among our customers, you find shipyards, ship owners, navies, and system suppliers. Next, please. When we talk about VGP 2013, we focus on the stern tube components and how the new rules affect our steel technologies. So with the new VGP rules, it becomes mandatory to use the EALs and all oil-to-sea interfaces unless technical and feasible. And we offer you technologies to fulfill the stringent EPA requirements and protect the ship with its crew. So let's start. Next slide, please. First, let's have a look at what you have to consider before changing to an EAL. So we learned already that not every biodegradable oil is an EAL. The problem is, next please, biodegradable oils or EALs can chemically affect the sealing rings, especially by hydrolysis. So this means that the lifetime of the seal ring material decreases, and we risk to have shorter dry docking periods, even less than 5 years. We have a risk of the sealing failure. Next. Biodegradable lubricants are not suitable for all sealing ring materials. That is very important. Next. But we provide a special Viton pot sealing ring material. And this material is compatible to EAL. We have gained experiences now for more than 10 years with this special material in the market. And we can use it up to 5 years with EALs. This depends, of course, on the seal type, the application, and also the operational conditions. Before using an EAL, it's very important to check if it's approved by us. We have a big R&D department who carries out extensive tests for all the given applications, and you can find the results on our latest EAL list on our website. And we will update this continuously because the number of EALs is also increasing. Last very important point is also that you have to avoid intermixing different oil types because of unpredictable chemical effects on the sealing ring materials. So you cannot use first one sealing ring material and switch between the oils. And this has to be checked also with your oil suppliers and or with the shipyard how the switchover can be done. So we've seen in Peter's and Ben's presentation that it should probably be done during dry dock. Next, please. In general, there are two options on how to fulfill the VGP 2013 regulation. So for the operation with an EAL, it is necessary to replace the sealing rings with our special Viton pot rings during the next scheduled dry dock. And in addition, we can issue a statement that the existing simplex seal is technical and feasible with the use of EAL. And the statement you have to keep on board starting from last December and is part also of the annual report to the EPA. Important is that if there is a technical solution available at the time of the next scheduled dry dock, the vessel must switch to EAL in order to fulfill the VGP requirements. Next, please. Now let's talk about some detailed sealing technologies and how to comply with VGP 2013. I would like to start with the oil-to-sea interfaces, then I move on to the non-oil-to-sea interfaces. As you can see here on the slide, EAL is mandatory for all oil-to-sea interfaces, and the EPA requirements concern our conventional seals, but also in addition the cathodic protection. Here we offer a special sealing ring material, the Viton pot, as well as an aluminium anode. Next, please. As an illustration, I give you here a drawing of our conventional simplex seal assembly. So you can see the use of EAL is mandatory for the conventional seal. And you have to select Viton pot for all sealing rings which come into contact with EAL. So important to know, so it's not only for, it doesn't only concern the aft seal, but also the forward seal. All sealing rings which come into contact with EAL have to be made of Viton pot seal ring material. Next, please. Let me turn now to the non-oil-to-sea interfaces. So next, yeah. So non-pollution air seals, which fully eliminate any oil leakage under normal operation and therefore cease being an oil-to-sea interface, can be considered as VGP conform. So it is very important that there's no leakage. So here we work closely together with one of the major classes to get also an additional statement of verification. And we are also in continuous contact with the class and the EPA to finalize the procedure on how to provide the ship owner with such a statement. Next slide, please. We move on with our simplex airspace. So here, the key factor of our non-pollution seal system is the air chamber. Because we have a perfect separation of water and oil by this dedicated air chamber, therefore it will be considered as non-oil-to-sea interface. So here, no EAL is required. You have no oil leakage into the seawater, and it's a perfectly environmental friendly non-pollution seal system. The main characteristic of our simplex airspace is the void space, which you can see here on the picture. It's located between seawater and oil, as well as the pressure settings of the air and oil below the seawater. So our simplex airspace really ensures that there's no leakage into the seawater. And we can call it a non-pollution seal system and a non-oil-to-sea interface. So no use of EAL required, and this, of course, will affect the performance of the whole seal system. Next slide, please. So here you can see we prepared another drawing showing the main characteristics of the non-pollution simplex airspace assembly. We have filled the oil chambers with standard mineral oil or with the preferred oil of the ship owner. And here we can use standard searing materials. There's no need for special searing materials. The cathodic protection has to be made of aluminum, however. So this is a perfectly seal solution, also in compliance with the VGP 2013. Next slide, please. And we're already at the end of our presentation. There are also water lubricated seals in the market, and you can fulfill also the VGP requirements with them. And we provide special water lubricated seal designs and water lubrication systems. You can choose between a Simplan face type seal or a simplex lip type seal. So in conclusion, we can offer you proven seal technologies depending on the individual requirements of the ship owner for environmental protection and, of course, for safety of the ship and for safety of the crew. For further information, please feel free to ask us after this webinar, and of course we will be available for any questions afterwards as well, so you feel free to contact us, me or my colleague Christian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pirjetta. Next up, before we get into questions, we have Bridget Williams on the phone, who's from our Design for the Environment program here at EPA, and she's going to talk for a little bit about the DFE program and labeling program for EALs. Bridget?
Hi, thank you. I'd like to just give you a brief overview of the DFE program, and if there's any questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer those. EPA's Design for the Environment program, or DFE program, works in partnership with product manufacturers. We help them make safer chemical-based products. Primarily, we've been focused in the cleaning sector, and although our method and how we look at chemicals and products in general is applicable to a wide range of categories. We even have identified a safer firefighting foam. To meet or to qualify to carry the label, products must meet our standard for safer products. And to meet this this standard, every chemical ingredient in a product is reviewed against our criteria for safer chemical ingredients. We have criteria based on functional class. So when we're looking at a product, we are comparing solvents with solvents, surfactants with surfactants. Both the standard and the safer chemical ingredient criteria are available on the DFE website. It is epa.gov/DFE. And you can also find a list of products that have been qualified to carry the label. Also on the standard and criteria page, which is available on that website, there's a section for safer marine lubricants. This is what DFE is calling EALs. This is a new sector for Design for the Environment. And we are currently working with lubricant manufacturers to identify safer lubricants, or EALs. Also, I'd like to mention that we are working hard to help formulators and others find and choose safer chemical ingredients. To this end, we have listed chemicals that meet our criteria on the DFE website. This is available at epa.gov/DFE/safer ingredients. This list came about through the DFE product review process. As we reviewed products, we were identifying chemicals that met our criteria, and that resulted in this list. It's a living list. We are adding chemicals to it as we review products, and as new data is developed, some chemicals may be removed from the list as well. Again, that's available on the DFE website at epa.gov/DFE. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you, Bridget.
Great, thank you all. First of all, before we get to questions, let me start by thanking our presenters again. I know that from being on a different continent in some cases to being in a very snowy Washington, D.C. and not yet required to be at the office yet taking their time to present here today, we greatly appreciate everyone's time. Before we transition to questions, I do just want to re-emphasize once again that the viewpoints presented today are those of the individual speakers, and sometimes those represent the interests of their private companies. This is not an endorsement on the part of EPA. Regarding the EAL manufacturers specifically, we had two good EAL manufacturers on the line who were very kind to give us their time. There are also several other EAL manufacturers who are producing these products. I'm personally aware of 4 or 5 myself that are just some of the majors. Once again, this is not an endorsement of these particular two, but once again, we are very grateful for them sharing their time with us to talk a little bit about technical feasibility and their products as appropriate. Same thing goes for our seal manufacturer, our stern tube manufacturer. There are other companies as well who are tackling these same issues that Blohm Voss is. So once again, thank you to Blohm Voss for giving us their time. Of course, there are other companies out there, and if we were to have every company on the line, I think this would be a rather long presentation. So we wanted to give you a nice viewpoint. So with that being said, I will immediately start launching into some questions. Before I do, the final disclaimer, starting to use a lot of them today. We have a lot of questions coming in, and we only have about 20 minutes. So we'll get to as many questions as we can. However, we will not be able to address everyone's questions. So the first question we have, I will direct to Kate Kelly. And the question is, we have a variant of this question. Several folks asked this question. Can you describe the issue of EAL usage for deck machinery? If you have a top deck application, must one use an EAL if it's technically feasible?
Thank you, Ryan. So I alluded to this a little bit in the oil to see interface, but maybe glossed over it quickly, so I'll go back and talk about deck machinery. So the requirement to use an EAL for deck machinery is in the case where the deck machinery is subject to immersion. If the deck machinery is not subject to immersion, the use of an EAL is just a recommendation. I also mentioned there are other provisions in the VGP that apply to deck machinery, and those are in section 2.2.1 of the VGP, and that's related to deck washdown and runoff. But again, unless the deck machinery is subject to immersion, it is only a recommendation to use an EAL. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. The next question I have is for Ben Bryant. It's a little bit of a specific one, but we'll go on and ask it here. Ben, there's some concern about the use of ester oils and mixing with water, and esters are one of the base oils that folks use with EALs. Can you explain this potential concern and then describe how whether or not you think this is an actual concern with EALs using ester products?
Well, sure, thank you. The concern around ester-based products is with a process called hydrolysis, and esters are basically made chemically from an acid and an alcohol, and under heat and with the presence of water, they can separate back into the acid and alcohol, which would then degrade the oil. And the history on esters was mostly with triglycerides, which are vegetable oils, just common vegetable oils, which have a very simple molecular structure, and vegetable oils under heat are very susceptible to hydrolysis. Modern EALs that use ester oils, however, use very complex molecular structures. They're called polyol esters with much stronger bonds in the molecular structure that are highly resistant to hydrolysis. So working with your EAL supplier, they can give you more information on that topic, and there are specific tests that can be used to show how resistant a particular ester oil is to hydrolysis, but it is something that vessel owners should be aware of and continue to monitor. We do suggest with any EAL going on to a sampling program over the life of that EAL so that you can monitor the condition of the oil.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ben. The next question I'm going to direct toward Bridget Williams in our Design for the Environment office. And Bridget, I'm actually going to combine three folks' questions into one here. The first one is, have any lubricants been approved under the EPA Design for the Environment question? And the other components are, how long does it take for a formulation to be approved under EPA's Design for the Environment program, and do we expect any to come out in the near term? Any DFE-labeled products, I should say. Three questions.
Three questions. All right, I'll try to remember them. The first question, I believe, was, are there any DFE lubricants out there right now? Again, this is a new sector for DFE, and we are working with lubricant manufacturers right now. So the answer is no. And then jumping to your last question, we are hopeful that we will have DFE lubricants, I would say this year even. And then the middle question, I believe, was application and what that looks like. In terms of how to start, I do recommend going to the DFE website again. It's epa.gov/DFE. On the website, we have a how to partner link under About the Label. And that walks you through some of the steps. Number one is looking at the DFE criteria, checking formulas to see if they look like they might meet our criteria is a great way to start. The next step would be to reach out to one of our third-party profilers. We have two of them. They are NSF International and POC Services, and information for those companies is listed on that How to Partner webpage. The process then is that one of those two companies profiles the product and packages all the information together that DFE ultimately reviews. Time frame, that could take typically anywhere from, I'd say, about 3 to 5 months. Because this is a new sector, it could be a little bit longer.
Bridget, thank you very much. That was a great answer. Next question here is for Peter. I'm going to try to paraphrase a little bit here, Peter. The EPA obviously is interested in using products that are more environmentally friendly, and EPA's required use of EALs because of their reduced environmental impact. However, as a ship operator, I'm obviously concerned about performance. In your opinion, do EALs have any performance benefits relative to mineral oils? Or disadvantages as well, I guess, would be part of the question.
Yes, there are definitely some performance benefits that can be found. And it goes back to some of the things that Ben was saying about the advantages of high-quality synthetic esters. Among the benefits are the ones of improved resistance to oxidation and hydrolysis, But in particular, there's also very good viscometrics, very good performance at high and low temperature. For example, one of our hydraulic EALs has been in use on a ferry operating in the Baltic Sea with winter temperatures down to minus 35 centigrade. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's low, for a period of 5 years now, and working completely satisfactory. The product does not shear down. It holds its natural viscosity characteristics, which can be a disadvantage with some mineral oils. So that's one example of outperformance. And there was another case history where by switching to the use of EAL on a crane installation, a bulker operator was able to continue to operate the vessel and was achieving usage of over 2,000 hours, whereas with a conventional mineral oil, which was shearing down and failing at about 400 hours, causing very costly repairs and meaning the vessel had to be unloaded by dockside cranes rather than a self-unloader. So it was adding enormously to the expense and the cost of the operation for the ship owner. So there are some definite performance benefits. One third and final example would be with our biodegradable grease. It's been found to have a much greater resistance to wash-off from rudder stocks and other deck applications compared with mineral oils. So it's been, you've not needed to re-grease so often, and consumption of the product has been lower.
Great, Peter. Thank you very much. The next question I'll take here myself very quickly, and the question is, how do vessel operators, if they use EALs in some oil to interfaces but not others, how will they report that to EPA? And this is a situation we're envisioning for a lot of vessel operators. We actually expect that to be the majority of circumstances. And there will basically be a list, a drop-down list that when you do your annual report, you can say, okay, my stern tube, I'm using it. My thrusters, I'm not using it. And once again, very short explanation. We're not looking for theses or dissertations supplied, but we're looking for common sense explanations that are documentable on board your vessel. So immediately I'll go to the next question, which is a very challenging one, and I will tell you perhaps one of the most challenging questions we've been getting over the last few months. Two of our speakers today referenced the use of air seal or void space sorts of seals, or stern tube seals, or designs, I should say. The question is this allowable under EPA's VGP, or must vessel operators use EALs with all applications?
Thank you, Ryan. So for this question, really for the use of an air seal or a void space, the answer hinges on whether or not with the use of that air seal system or void space system, that the stern tube or equipment ceases to be an oil-to-sea interface. So based on our understanding of these design systems, air seal design or void space design, when properly maintained or sufficiently emptied, they may completely eliminate oil drips or leakage into the surrounding water. However, I'll note that EPA cannot provide a type approval or clean endorsement that these systems would eliminate this discharge. In other words, we are not in a position to issue a certification, or we are not sort of doing a product certification to say that these systems will cease to discharge. If the stern tube sealed such as that and an air seal can fully eliminate the oily discharge, then the lubrication stern tube would be much like a seawater lubricated stern tube in terms of having no potential for oily discharge. In this situation, an EAL would not be required. However, if there's any reasonable possibility that such a system fails during normal operation of that system, then an EAL must be used if technically feasible. In other words, if the vessel operator utilizes an air seal system and under normal operation of that system, and the oil-to-sea interface is eliminated, then you are not required to use an EAL. However, if during normal operation that system fails, an EAL is not used, then that could be a permit violation and must be reported in the annual report. Again, though EPA is not issuing pre-approvals or type approvals evaluating the merits of individual air seal systems, if an operator elects to use an air seal in lieu of an EAL, EPA recommends that the vessel operator have a third-party certification that the seal design is unlikely to leak during normal operation. Such third-party certifications could be provided by a classification society, as they may have a significant expertise in analyzing whether the system can be reasonably expected to leak during the recommended life of the product. But again, we don't have a specific requirement that you seek out a third-party certification versus self-certification. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to the vessel owner or operator to ensure compliance with the requirement. So in this situation, we recommend you go to these types of certification societies so you have some assurance that this product will work as designed.
Great. Thank you, Kate. And this is a question we have been getting quite a lot, and we're happy if you have any follow-up questions, please send them to our VGP box on this particular question. The next question is for Pirjetta and Stüven, and it's for your particular product, can they use so for your existing seal system, I should say, can the vessel operator use EALs with your various products?
Hello. Yeah, in general, we can state that our Viton pot sealing ring material is designed to operate up to 5 years, but this depends on the operating condition, on the seal design, and the complete shaft layout and the system layout. So from our side, we always recommend that you get in direct contact with us, so we look into your specific case and inform about our recommended lifetime. Yeah.
Great. Christian, thank you. The next answer, once again, for Kate Kelly. Will Design for the Environment, or DFE, the program that Bridget was discussing, will it provide a formal approval for EALs, or environmentally acceptable lubricants? Kate?
Great, thank you. So as I mentioned, an EAL must meet the definition that we include in the permit. We believe that a DFA label will meet those permit requirements, along with some of the other labeling programs that we mentioned. So again, we believe a DFA label would provide a product that's consistent with the permit requirements.
Great, thank you. And related to that question, Kate, here's another one for you. How should technical feasibility or infeasibility be determined by the vessel owner, operator? Is it something that's appropriate for them to determine?
Absolutely. So it is up to the vessel owner or operator to determine whether or not the use of an EAL is technically feasible. So again, we give you the definition includes a couple of sort of provisions in which we think technical infeasibility could occur, such as there are no products approved for use, or primarily what we expect to be a main source of technical infeasibility is having to wait until your next dry dock. So again, as I mentioned in the air seal answer, the requirement to use an EAL or compliance to the EAL provision is up to the vessel owner or operator, and that includes that determination of technical infeasibility. And as Ryan mentioned before, if you make such a determination, what our expectation is that you provide, and part of your record keeping, a clear explanation of why you made that decision.
Great, thank you. Another question I'll direct back toward Pirjetta and Christian. In your presentation, you talk about how some seal materials you believe were appropriate for use with EAL for 5 years and some were not. The question says, more info on that, please. So it's a rather broad question, but I would focus it very specific as to why you have certain seal materials you think are appropriate for EALs and certain that are not. And this is a question obviously to go on for in 20 minutes, so let's try to keep the answer to a minute or less.
Okay, we are offering a various type of sealing ring material, and from our side we have the experience and specially designed the Viton pot material to operate with the EAL or biodegradable oils. Yeah. More info on that, or is that answering your question?
I think that does a fairly good job, and I would say that anybody who has specific questions on their product can call them or write them offline after the presentation.
Of course, we always can answer these questions in detail.
So actually, the Viton pot material was developed more than 10 years ago for very special application in pot systems, for very high operating conditions, high temperature for synthetic oils. And so that was a very good advantage for us that we can use it now together with EALs. Because they fulfill the specific conditions.
Great. Thank you. So the next question for Peter Vickers. Peter, during your presentation, you talked about various applications that EALs could be used. Can you describe to a certain extent how you've worked with product manufacturers of these seal systems to ensure that your products are compatible with the various seal systems they have?
Yes, we've done cooperation with with the stern tube seal manufacturers stretching back to the late 1990s to do a combination of in-house static testing done both at the seal manufacturer's site and at our site, rig tests with the seal manufacturers, and then most importantly long-term sea trials to prove the product actually in practice over the working life of the seal. So that was with the stern seal manufacturers. With some of the other equipment manufacturers, it's again been a similar process of demonstrating by independent third-party performance testing that our products meet whatever mechanical performance specifications have been laid down by the equipment manufacturers, but then again backed up on a very prudent basis by long-term field trials arranged on a case-by-case basis with the agreement of the equipment manufacturer and with the consent of the customer who's been willing to put forward a vessel for trial. It's been a three-way agreement between the interested parties and with very close attention being given to monitoring the trials throughout the performance. And over time, that's led to sufficient evidence to come for the equipment makers to have confidence to move from a case-by-case to a full approval.
Great. Peter, thank you. That was a thorough answer. I very much appreciate it. And once again, going back to we're not particularly endorsing Peter's approach of product, I'm sure that other manufacturers have gone through similar sorts of approaches in their products. So the next question we will direct to Kate Kelly. And the question is, who will be responsible for monitoring and ensuring compliance?
Sure. As I mentioned before, so again, compliance with the provisions of the VGP, specifically for EALs, is up to the vessel owner or operator. And the way that they are going to be sort of demonstrating compliance is through submission of information on their annual report. So as we mentioned, again, this is a report that's due to EPA at by February of, the first report will be due February of 2015, and basically each report will reflect the activities during the previous operating year. But in that annual report, you'll be required to submit whether or not you used an EAL for a particular application. As Ryan mentioned, we envision that having a drop-down menu so you can go sort of by each oil to sea interface and indicate whether or not you've used an EAL or not been able to use an EAL due to technical infeasibility. Where you have been able to use an EAL, as we mentioned, you'll just have to provide a short sort of description or explanation of whether or not you've used a labeled product, or in the case of a non-labeled product, sort of some information from a technical report that shows it meets the definition of an EAL. And then where technical infeasibility is you're unable to use an EAL because of technical infeasibility, you'll have to indicate the use of the non-EAL in your annual report and provide some explanation as to why that use was technically infeasible. Both of these are also required to be kept as part of your record keeping for your vessel that needs to be kept on board your ship. So again, compliance will be sort of assessed through the submission of your annual reports to EPA.
Great, Kate. Thank you very much. You can see part of the reason we don't want dissertations is we have to read these reports. And so obviously we want short, concise answers, and we are very much that you can later document it as need be if we have follow-up questions regarding your determinations. Another question we've gotten, and I'll answer this one, is whether the design for environment labeling or certification is mandatory under the VGP. And this actually ties to questions we've got about 8 to 10 of our guests today. And the answer is no, it's not required. The EPA explicitly allows for use of labeling programs such as DFE. There's several others that are listed as well. Blue Angel, Ecolabel, for instance. There are a lot of them that are listed. And we explicitly state that for purposes of the VGP, these are compliant with the definitions in the VGP. And the reason we did this is a lot of vessel operators have questions about, hey, what product can I use for my particular application? And this is a ready-made list. This is not a list that EPA on the regulatory side we have to go through and certify. However, it's not mandatory to use this list. So if you have a vendor or supplier that you trust, and you trust either their in-house testing or their third-party certification testing, generally as a matter of policy, we tend to prefer third-party testing. However, there are some vendors that have very good in-house shops. So that's a determination you have to make as the vessel operator. If there are products out there that you trust that supplier, you can use this particular product. Something I want to reemphasize, a point that Kate made earlier, at the end of the day, the way the NPDES program works, the way the VGP works, the vessel operator is responsible for compliance. So once again, you want to be sure that you trust those determinations that are made. So that was a long-winded answer to that one. So the final question I will ask here, I can find it up here again. Bear with me real quick. I'm sorry. Scroll down just a bit. Okay. Okay, so here's the question. I'm just going to read it. It's a bit cumbersome to try to paraphrase. Acknowledging the technical feasibility if certain equipment is replaced with newer environmentally acceptable lubricant-friendly equipment, must a vessel owner-operator replace this equipment so that EALs may be used, or may the existing equipment be used for its useful life and remain compliant with the VGP provisions under the technical and feasibility provisions? And Kate, I will direct this question to you.
Thank you, Ryan. So basically, what the VGP is doing is we're not requiring the installation of wholly new equipment. So we, as you see in one of the provisions for technical and feasibility, we understand that some applications may require you to go into dry dock. So a reason that it could be technically infeasible is that you have to wait until your next dry dock to be able to install the appropriate material to be able to switch over to an EAL. Where there is equipment maintenance or there is upgrades that need to happen, then the expectation is, yes, at that point that you would be switching over to an EAL. But we understand that there is a transition necessary in some cases to switch over to this requirement. So again, we're not requiring you to go through and wholly replace everything on board your vessel to make this switch, but we do expect over time as you go into your regularly scheduled dry docks that transition would be made.
Great. Kate, thank you very much, and that was a very helpful answer in my opinion, a little biased perhaps. With that, I will say we have a list of a lot of unanswered questions, and I apologize to everyone on the line whose questions we did not get to. Hopefully we got the general scopes of most folks' questions answered. If you have follow-up questions, please feel free to send us emails to vgp@epa.gov. As I have mentioned in the past, we currently have a bit of a backlog associated with the email box, but we generally are pretty good about getting back to you as long as it's not something, the sort of question that makes our hair go gray in the course of reading. So please do feel free to send us any responses there. Finally, to wrap up, we will have a short survey at the end of this presentation. Please feel free to submit any feedback, including if you have any follow-up questions either on EALs or other things that EPA can provide additional information for. And we look forward to reading your thoughts in the future. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you for making time with us here today.
Just a reminder, we are recording today's presentation, so all participants should be getting an email afterwards with the recording and the slides. And thanks again for participating, and this concludes today's webinar.